People who work in law enforcement. What is work like right now? Where I'm at, there's been plenty of protests and I've not had a day off in over a week now. But honestly, the protesters here have been respectful, well-mannered, and honestly a great representation of how things should be. I've had great conversations with them and think some good came of it. Sure, I had one or two get in my face screaming and such, but it really didn't bother me cause of the above paragraph. I'd say, from my experience, most people aren't anti-cop per se. They are anti-excessive force and violation of rights. And I'm with them. Protest the shit out of it. There is a need for change and I'm ready for it. Help me get these knuckle-draggers out so we can all have better days. My cousin is in an outer suburb of Minneapolis and he just became a cop. He said Friday night, when the protests and riots were happening, when he worked was the hardest night of his life. The chief officer said he hadn't seen anything like this in the past 18 years he served there. A friend of mine is in the army and she said she's been on active duty this entire time and it's been super long for her. I witnessed the effects of the riots firsthand and it's crazy. I don't think this city has ever seen something like this in most people's lifetimes, maybe in the past. But not the current generations. A cop buddy of mine quit his job. Had been coming to a head. And this felt like the right move for him as the department wasn't making changes anytime fast. On the job 8 years. 5 in my current place. 3 as a detective. Work is fine. Our local communities went out and protested. We were out there to support them. We didn't have any rioting or looting. I wish all places could say the same. I'm a police officer in a town in the middle of England. It feels pretty detached from what's happening in America. Or even what's happening in London. We had protests over Saturday and Sunday. But there was very little overt police presence. In what I think was a deliberate act by our chief constable. As an organization, we've more or less said that we stand beside the protesters. But we will have to take action if there is violence. In the UK we police by consent. So the police need to imbue a sense of trust in what they do. Otherwise it wouldn't work. There's always a small minority in any protest that appears to only be there to cause problems. Or is looking for a fight with the police. Or with other protesters. But by and large the vast majority of protesters where I am seem to be there for the right reasons. Work for me has more or less carried on as normal up to this point. But if the UK is put through a second wave of COVID-19, and there is still civil unrest around the BLM movement, I think we might start struggling to police the way we have been. Been on the job for a few months now in a liberal beach town. Beginning was weird because of COVID. Not many radio calls and little proactive enforcement. Since George Floyd's murder, things were really tense in the beginning. My department has treated the protest as more of a parade and let the protesters exercise their First Amendment right. A few broken windows here and there, but nothing big. A lot of talk within my department, and so far my chief has decided to do away with the carotid restraint. I'm sure more change is coming, but hopefully they start to change the hiring process in terms of multiple psych evals and begin to fire people for gross misconduct and or openly being a bigot. We've been 12 on, 12 off for the last week. Due to how tame everything has been, we just went back to our normal work schedule. Edit, work schedule. I work in a smaller police department in NJ. We have a protest this week and the department is walking with the protesters. Surrounding departments have had their protests and all were peaceful. In the US there is a divide in how police are held to certain standards. There are small to mid-size municipal departments with a relatively decent town population. The pay is high and the standards are higher in the job. If you fuck up, it's your ass. We get a lot of mandatory training with more that gets piled on every year. Especially de-escalation and dealing with mentally unstable persons. I work in this area and am typically looked down upon by the bottom departments I'm about to describe because we aren't real cops and our job is too easy. City departments and those large sheriff departments in the South are usually the places with the problems. There are a lot of cops to be accounted for and corruption is usually citywide, going all the way to the mayor sometimes. In a lot of respects. HBO's The Wire is a very accurate representation of most, not all, cities. The pay is usually not as good and the hours are worse. It's also a lot easier to get hired into these jobs, so the candidate pool is naturally shittier. State police are busy sucking their own dick and can do no wrong. No one likes them. Joking. It's exhausting and depressing. I can't go an hour without someone flipping me off or screaming, "Fuck the police." I'm just as upset about the murder of George Floyd and police brutality in general as anyone else. I wanted to be a cop to make a positive difference in my community. I work for an incredible agency that hires high-caliber folks, and I've never once seen any of my coworkers do their jobs with any malice of hatred toward anyone. I just want to be happy to go to work again. The attitude against cops is in the shitter. My IRL friend is a cop, and most arrests he gets filmed by a perpetrator's friend and they're yelling police brutality. He says it's fucking annoying and he's brown. From a relative whose husband works for the Secret Service at the White House, my husband was on the front lines of the recent White House protest. It was a long night for me. But it was a much longer night for many others. We see the burning buildings. The broken glass. We hear about the tear gas. And barricades. What we don't hear and see is this down finger. This is what my husband remembers most. He remembers the bridge makers. The people there that are angry, hurt and in pain, but they build a bridge anyway. The people that are scared, tired, and struggling but build a bridge anyway. They see the way through this as peaceful and hopeful. He told me of a black woman, whose face is frozen in his mind. She stood between him and a swarming group of people who wished death, violence and all other kinds of things upon him. Shouting back at him, she said, "I got you." Shouting to the protesters, she said, "This isn't the way, these voices are being drowned out." But I believe these voices are the ones who will not just change minds but change hearts. I have no judgment to pass because I can't understand. But I want people to know that mixed with the sad, terrible, and ugly there is hope. There are bridges. Quote. My friend is a firefighter near a major city having riots. This Saturday night, they received multiple calls for dumpster fires. Would respond, and instead of finding a fire would be pelted with bricks and such. This happened so many times. They stopped responding to anything but building fires to at least attempt to stay safe. They tried to help people and were punished for it. I understand the anger, but that was not a productive channel for it. Australia here. Thanks to the COVID restrictions, a lot of the regular crime was down. But then resources were needed for border closures and self-quarantine checks and other COVID-related patrols. So probably same as usual. Gotta say I feel for Leos in America. Whole lot of them are probably as disgusted as the public by the actions of those officers who killed GF. But they're copping the brunt of the community's anger about it. I work in a prison. I'm surrounded by racists. I'm surrounded by people calling for the US military to open fire on American citizens. I'm fairly certain I've heard the N-word thrown around more times in the last 2 weeks than I have in my entire life. Detective here who works sexual offenses. I deal with rape victims and identifying their offenders. The real bad stuff. I'm not on the front line and not in the USA, but still feeling it. Still showing up to work every day and doing my job as best as I can. Nothing has changed for me or my department. No protests or riots that I'm aware of. Only thing abnormal these past 2 weeks are the amount of suicides and attempted suicides. Usually that spike in suicides happen around the holidays. But the pandemic is keeping people from getting treatment and they're left alone with their own thoughts for too long. My brother works for the SWAT team as an EMC in NC. From my understanding, he provides medical attention to those injured during protests, riots, other intense situations. His area has been pretty calm so far. But he's half black and has been yelled at for being on the wrong side. He has a very calm nature about himself. Almost zen-like. So when I ask him how things are going, he says it's fine, not to worry, and that people say crazy things when they're upset. He doesn't take anything personally. He once stitched up a member of the KKK during the Charlottesville riots. That was ironic. My brother is a sheriff's deputy in a mostly rural area. Last week he pulled over a black man for a broken taillight. He said the man seemed nervous, so he asked, "Is everything okay?" The man said he was afraid. That he had heard so many stories of violence and thought white officers would hate him. My brother ended up spending half an hour sitting and talking with him. The hardest part of all of this is that no matter how many bad apples show up or what institutional problems need fixed, the good officers are just trying to take care of people. The world needs change, but we can't forget the struggles we put on all the men and women still working for our communities. Not me, but my dad. He's worked over 100 hours in the past 7 days. He stands for hours with people screaming at him. When he is not at protests, he is scared to pull people over now. He comes home and the emotional unload is unreal. Now threats are being made against him and his family, including me. He won't wear his wedding ring to work anymore. Canadian cop here. Quite honestly, I find the day-to-day patrol life hasn't changed where I am much. We've had some protests and they were peaceful. Nobody is going out of their way to be belligerent towards us any more than the norm. This situation has opened my eyes so much to things that I didn't even realize were an issue. So I've changed how I interact with different neighborhoods. For example, I've started to patrol on foot in certain pockets and will speak with members of the community rather than drive around in the cruiser because it seems to humanize the perception of police with people who are nervous around us. The 911 aspect hasn't changed at all. For the most part we see people on their worst days, and I find that when we show up to emergencies, the public is still relieved to see us. The problem itself is much bigger than police, but obviously we hold so much power, so it's an excellent place to start. Not a cop, but work for Highway Patrol in California as an operator. We have just been busy with demonstrations. People going onto the freeways. Large numbers of people blocking the streets or unincorporated areas. We also protect and go to calls at state buildings or facilities and protect top dignitaries. So we make sure there are no problems there. For us operators and dispatchers, schedules are normal, workflow has increased. But for officers, their shifts have changed. They do not have days off. They are working 12 hours straight and have 12 hours off. They have most of the officers working, if not all, and we are assisting other agencies that are local to us. It certainly is a tough situation. Even working for law enforcement, there are disagreements on what is going on between us. Even before the death of George Floyd, we certainly saw a higher number of calls due to COVID-19. But now things have definitely exploded. Some advice I can give out: 1. For any life of death emergency, call 911, even for pets. 2. When in doubt, call 911 and they, or we, will give you non-emergency phone to whoever you may need. 3. Keep social distancing. Use a mask and other protective equipment if you go out. COVID-19 is still rampant. 4. Check online for updates on freeways or street closures. Most of that info is found of internal traffic page for CHP. 5. Stay safe out there, keep on fighting against racism, fellow humans. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe, and hit the notification button. See you next time.